Holly. Thank you, fan club. So I think you've heard some recurring themes over the last day and a half in a bunch of talks. Complexity is increasing as we try and build great software. Full stack visibility is something that we're all striving for, and New Relic can play a big part. And building a great experience for your customers is paramount, and software plays a big role in that. And one thing that I think is going to be unique for this talk is that we're focusing specifically on native applications. And in a lot of ways, native apps magnify the opportunity and the challenges that are in all those themes. And so hopefully we can talk a little bit about how to best take advantage of that big opportunity, but also the big challenge when you're trying to ship a great application. So specifically, we're going to focus on how to think about the full stack when you're shipping great mobile apps. Safe harbor slide. And my name is Devin. I'm part of the product marketing team here at New Relic. And a little bit of background on me. I've been working in mobile for over 10 years now. Super passionate about it. Way back when, 2005, I started kind of building apps on, who can believe it, like Nokia devices. And then I worked at an agency for a number of years, building apps and also working with companies to understand the kind of strategy and opportunity with mobile. And then most recently, before New Relic, I worked at Facebook at a company that got acquired called Parse, which was a mobile backend as a service product. So I'm super passionate about mobile, and it's great to work on the mobile team here at New Relic. And we also have Susie here, who's our fearless product manager, so I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everybody. So I'm here. I'm the product manager for both our mobile APM or performance monitoring product, as well as for New Relic's mobile apps. So I get to see a little bit of both sides on that. My background, I'm actually an electrical engineer by schooling. So I started off with circuit boards and chip design. And then went into software, and I wrote code for several years, Python, Java, C++. And eventually made my way into product management. So I've been at New Relic now for a year and a half, something like that. And I've taken that year and a half to as an opportunity to go talk to customers a lot. I mean, that's my favorite thing to do, is to find out, well, what are the problems out there that we can help with. And just in October, I talked to 20 customers. So for me, it's like it's a really exciting, really fun part of my job. And I hear a lot of tales from our customers. So I want to use this talk as an opportunity to share some of the things that I hear and also offer up some best practices.
Thank you, Susie. So when we talk about building great experiences, this is not a great experience, right? The dreaded spinner. This is something we don't want to encounter as a user, and I'm sure we've all encountered it in the last few days. And it's something we're trying to avoid as we build great apps. And I think today we're going to talk, as Susie mentioned, we have a unique vantage point at New Relic. We talk to a lot of customers across a lot of different industries and verticals. And we also just have our SDK running in millions of devices in the wild today. And we've seen some common patterns emerge and some common missed opportunities to build a better organization and a better customer experience. So firstly, I'm going to set a little bit of context about native apps and how we think about it. And then we're going to dive into some of the best practices that we think our customers are asking for. So we've all heard this idea that software is eating the world, but you can actually probably make the argument that native apps are eating the world. And if you're an organization trying to build a great experience for your customer, if you don't get your app strategy right, you're going to lose the digital war. And one statistic that I saw recently that's pretty incredible is that of the time spent on a smartphone, 90% of that time is spent inside native applications. And yes, there's some nuance to this in terms of mobile web and the web versus apps. But I think my takeaway from this statistic is that if you're trying to get your customers to spend a lot of time with your brand and keep engaging with your product or your organization, they're probably going to want an application at some point to do that. And so it's a great opportunity to build that kind of high-touch interaction with your customer, but it's got to be good. And that's a huge opportunity, but native apps also present these unique challenges. And I'm curious in the room, like, do we have any iOS or Android developers here today? Do we have any like back-end engineers or developers? And do we have any like product managers or business owners? Okay, great. So, one of the things that I think the organization as a whole, but especially the product managers on the business side of the house is dealing with, is how do I get the app in people's hands? And you may have heard this in the room if you're a developer, but it's pretty incredible how hard that is, and it's gotten a lot harder in the last few years. So the App Store itself is somewhat unique in terms of distribution. So if you think about the web versus apps, the way that people find apps and download them is pretty different to the web. It's essentially a portal. The App Store from Apple and then the Google Play Store from Android, those are portals. They list every single app in the world in there. And so when you go in there, like, you can only see a certain amount of apps. It's the top ranking or the front page of the App Store. That is a place where your app can get discovered organically. But in general, people aren't stumbling upon the apps the way that they would be maybe your website. And we don't really have a page rank for native apps. So the takeaway there really is organic discovery is a challenge if you're trying to get the app in front of people. So what's happened is a bunch of companies like Facebook and Google, they're helping developers get apps in front of people through ads. But the cost to get that ad in front of the user and then specifically get that user to download your application and keep coming back to it has risen dramatically. So you can see the statistic here. In the last 2 years, like a 2x increase in the cost to acquire a loyal user. So March this year, like over $3 for a loyal user. So that's really expensive. So that's a big challenge for organizations to address. And that's only getting someone to like download your app. How do you keep them coming back? And this research from kind of the average Android user, 90% of them are churning out of the app within 30 days. So that means you've spent a ton of energy to figure out your distribution strategy. Maybe you've spent some money, $3 a download, and the user ends up not coming back after a month. And so again, a huge challenge. Retention is a big challenge with applications. And you may have seen this yourself if you use apps. You probably have maybe 5 to 10 apps you use on a monthly basis. And I wouldn't be surprised if you told me that you're not downloading apps as often anymore. And if you download an app and it's not a great experience, maybe you don't use it again. And finally, this idea that it's not getting easier. The competition within mobile, the competition everywhere, but especially in apps, is pretty incredible. There's a lot of mobile-first companies that have risen up that are born in apps, and so they're pretty good at it. There's also this idea of expectations. So if you use Facebook or if you use Netflix, those apps are incredibly performant and they're great experiences, and users have an expectation that your app will provide that. And complexity, we've talked a lot about this at FutureStack, but mobile's unique. iOS and Android developers are still in short supply, so if you're building out a team to ship a great app, there's complexity in just hiring the right people. There's multiple devices. You're dealing with Apple and Android, updating the OS. So complexity is definitely increasing there. And then actually we'll get into it later, but how do you build that application given the dependency on back-end services? And so here is really kind of a key kind of organization of the rest of this session. And this is this idea that we see these 3 missing pieces of the mobile puzzle. So firstly, performance as a feature. Apple talks about this, but it's this idea that as an organization, when you ship an application, you have a set of features. And if you don't have performance on that list and have a way as a system of shipping great performance, you're missing out on an opportunity to address those challenges I mentioned earlier and just build a great experience. Also, the second piece, which is almost a philosophical point, but it's this idea that a lot of organizations are focused on mobile apps as it's the iOS front-end code or the Android code. And this other team somewhere else, and this other part of the stack, the back end, is almost forgotten about. And we think that is kind of a missed opportunity to think about the stack in a fuller way. And then perhaps most importantly, as a team, as an organization, who is responsible for building those apps and maintaining them and building a great experience? Is it just the iOS developer? We see a disconnect there from a philosophy and almost from a tooling perspective, and we think, again, there's an opportunity to improve that, to build better experiences for your users. So I'm going to dive real quickly into performance as a feature as the first part of this mobile puzzle and maybe the first missing piece. So performance as a feature, what do I mean by that? Well, you have to be able to measure performance. Like, how do you do that today in terms of tooling? Do you have the ability to understand slow screens in your app? Understand what's happening in terms of crashes? Do you understand how performance is impacting specific engagement metrics? You have to have the ability to measure it. You have to, as an organization, have defined goals. And incredibly important, you have to have the ability to prioritize it. Are you prioritizing fixing performance as part of your next sprint? As you talk about a feature set, as you talk about an ask from another part of the organization. And then if you're building mobile apps, you're shipping them often. You're probably shipping them every few weeks, maybe every week. And so do you have the ability to repeat this process for each version of your application? And I'm going to go through a couple bits of research that really highlight the impact of performance on great experiences and also helping people get to your app and keep coming back. So pretty incredible stat. Half of one-star app reviews are because of app performance. And we know as users ourselves and from the research that ratings and reviews play a huge role in people deciding to download your app and also when it gets surfaced. If your app has good reviews and ratings, it's going to rank higher and it's going to help get more people to download your application. So 50% of App Store reviews are because of app performance. If you're not shipping performance as a feature, you're going to have more bad reviews. Again, pretty incredible, but moving from 1 star to 3 stars, so kind of not that intuitive in terms of like a leap, but it's a pretty dramatic leap in terms of conversion. So if you can move your rating in your app store rating from 2 to 3 stars, this research shows that you can nearly 3x your conversion. What I mean by that is you have a traffic every day to your app store, people are looking at your app. How many of those people go from looking at your app store page to hitting download? Move from 2 stars to 3 stars, you're going to 3x the amount of people that are doing that. And your marketing team and your go-to-market team is going to be super happy. Again, though, that's like really only a tiny part of the puzzle. What happens when your user opens your application for the first time? Maybe you shipped a new version of the app and there's a bug in there and it's crashing on the login screen. That's a terrible experience. And again, going back to this idea of magnification, first impressions matter more on native apps maybe than anywhere else. They're not going to come back to your app. So this research shows that only about 15-16% of your users will try will try a failing app more than twice. You get past that, you have a great onboarding experience, a great launch experience, but how do you get the user to do the things that you really want them to do and really help kind of keep them coming back? If you can improve performance within your application, you can improve engagement. I mean, this has been evident in software for a long time, but even more so in native apps. If you improve the speed of the app and the stability of the app, you can hit the metrics specific to your business and increase engagement. So I've talked a little bit about these 3 kind of missing parts of the puzzle, why native apps are really important and why there's challenges there, and why performance as a feature is critical for success. But who is that up to? Ultimately, how do you actually make that happen, and what have we seen as best practices? So Susie is going to step up and talk to you a little bit about actually making this happen in the real world.
Cool. Good job.
Thanks.
All right, so Devin set this up really well. We know performance is really important. That's why our company has a mobile team, right? That's their job, to make our mobile apps really, really stellar. And in part, that's true. But maybe there's a little bit more to it than that. Maybe there's more complexity behind the ownership and control that our mobile apps team might have. The other part to this is just that reminder that a mobile app is actually much more than what's installed on your phone. It's not an independent life anymore. It actually depends very, very much on back-end services. So I'm going to talk about these 2 kind of together. There are other parts of the mobile stack beyond what's installed on a phone. And this brings into question, like, who are the teams that are really involved with mobile? Who's responsible for the success of a mobile app? So we'll start with the mobile stack. So on a phone, you have me, I'm the end user. You have your phone, you have your app up, and you start looking at the different layers of the app. And You can slice them in different ways. You have some UI components, you have business logic behind it, you have different data access components and maybe some local data, all right? So that's your app, and you probably have some third-party SDKs that are part of this, things like that. But that's not all. So it is a much bigger story, and this is the broader mobile app. We have all the app side components, but we also have to think about network, and we have to think about back-end services and infrastructure. So I'm gonna be talking a little bit about different customer stories to illustrate some of this and to give you some ideas of what I hear every day. And the first one is we had a customer who recently came to New Relic because they wanted to monitor the next release of their mobile app. They were doing a huge push on this next big release. So they said, New Relic, we want you to help us. We want you to help us take charge and have a great mobile app experience for all of our users. So they came to us partly because we do have a mobile APM product. We have a mobile performance monitoring product, which is really helpful because otherwise you can't get the data about what the user is doing and what performance they're seeing and information about what device they're using and where they are and their network. But that's not all they purchased from New Relic. They actually bought all of our products. And the reason they bought all of our products is because they wanted to monitor the entire mobile stack. And the entire mobile stack is not just the app installed on your phone. So that's interesting because then we have to think about who owns the other parts. So here's another customer story. I was talking to an international rideshare company, and I was talking to their mobile developers. And it was a really interesting conversation for me because I was saying, well, how's your mobile app doing? And they said, well, actually, we have some issues. It crashes, we have errors, we have slow response times. But we actually can't fix any of those problems. They're all back-end issues. So we don't really value monitoring those problems. We think it's something for the other team. That's interesting also because if you talk to the people who are responsible for those services and you say, hey guys, what about your mobile app? How's it going? They're like, oh, well, we have a mobile team. And that's what they're working on. And there's this pretty big disconnect between those. So that's something that I'm here to offer some best practices to help that particular situation. You get teams communicating with each other and understanding that maybe this is, team sport, as Lou said, right? But it is a combination of teams working together. Another story, it's slightly different. And this is a fun little animation. I think it's the only one I have. But so another customer I was talking to, they actually write hundreds and hundreds of games. So pretty large company, and their mobile app teams are really large, and their mobile app developers, the culture there is pre-production only. What I mean by that is they design a game, or they add a new feature and put out a new release of a game, and then their work is done. So they just rely on ops and support to deal with any crashes, any performance issues. Their part is completely separate. And these are the developers, I would call them the mobile creatives, and they're not unique. So these are two customer stories, but these are things that I've heard over and over again. There is this sense that, well, they're not DevOps. They're not going after that same type of role. And it's just not really clear who owns the responsibility for making a great mobile app. So what I'm going to say is it has to be owned by everybody. A mobile app is a company brand. It's a huge part of companies' businesses now. So 65% of all online traffic now is on mobile. And a lot of that is revenue building, like for our e-commerce sites. A lot of it is initial user acquisition, and it's a team sport. So we have some teams that are what I'll call the super secret mobile teams. And I call them super secret because not everybody thinks about them when they think mobile. So we'll think about the mobile business owners. We'll think about the mobile app developers, but we don't necessarily think about the other guys. They don't even necessarily think about it themselves, all right? So you'll have people working on, figuring out the fast database queries that they need to do, and they're like really trying to optimize the ones that are the slowest. But they don't necessarily know which of those queries are most crucial for a really good end user experience on a mobile app. They're working in they have a different perspective. They're trying to fix the worst of what they see, but that doesn't mean they can prioritize what is really going to affect whether or not somebody decides to abandon the app. It could just be that they're not focused on, the most crucial screen for their funnel. So these are the 3 different pieces of the puzzle that we talked about. Performance is a feature. The mobile stack includes more than just what's installed on your phone. And the teams of the organization that are kind of not directly connected with their own impact on how well a mobile app does. So let's talk about what we can do to make this better. So I'm going to go through some specific examples, but across the board, a lot of the ways that teams can work together better, and this has come up in other talks more than I even expected, is by having alerts that make sense to 2 different teams, and by creating dashboards that create a common language for those teams to interact, to debug issues, and to actually track progress when they've fixed the problem. Let's see how great our graphs are looking then. For mobile, this is really important. These are 3 different examples of when this is really important. And the first is for crashes. So for crashes with our mobile product, if you guys were here for the keynote yesterday, we did a demo of crash analysis where you can slice and dice your crashes and figure out which ones are having the biggest impact. So you can dive right in and sort through those. That's really important, and that is commonly associated with mobile app code. It's not always the fault of the mobile app. And even if it is, it's not always easy to debug in isolation. So if you're able to make a connection and understand, well, what was the request that we made to the back end? What was the response that we got back? Is that something our mobile app was prepared to receive? And being able to work with the back end team to see if it correlates with some of the errors and problems that they were having, then you can actually get to the solution much quicker. Some mobile crashes might be that something in your infrastructure actually was a little bit flaky. A server was having issues. Mobile app developers never going to know that because they don't have a view into that. So for crashes, it's really important to do this, to have this cross-team view. For response time, it's similar. So response time, mobile app is making a request, and the back-end services are responding. It's a 2-way communication. So you can design that in different ways. You can bundle APIs together to make like one call and it's more efficient for your network. Or maybe you want to have very quick, short calls because you can get better speed and you get the screen to load faster. But it's a 2-team game. It takes like decisions and architecture that are really important to involve multiple people and not just have the mobile app team having to depend on whatever gets handed to them. And HTTP errors is the last one, which is the one I'm going to dive in a little bit more. So errors are really interesting. Errors, sometimes you expect them. So there are a lot of, I log in with the wrong password all the time. And so that's going to create an error. And that's an error that you expect. It's an error that you can include, in your baseline alerts. You can expect a certain number of errors. But there are errors also that are a break in user functionality. So somebody's trying to do something on their phone, and it doesn't even respond. Or it responds in a way that they didn't expect, or it just gets really slow. And sometimes it'll crash. So errors are really important. And again, errors are two-way communication. Errors can easily be created by a change in the back end that the mobile apps didn't expect and weren't completely prepared to deal with. Gonna dive in. Okay, so let's talk about alerting as associated with errors. What can we do with that? So some of the things that we do at New Relic for our own mobile apps, we actually use our own synthetics product. You can use other products as well to make sure that our APIs didn't change in a way that we didn't expect. So this is really, really important. And what's funny is I tell customers this. I mean, I learned this from our own mobile app developers who thought this through. And they're like, wait, they're breaking our stuff all the time. Let's get ahead of this. This is really, really helpful. What we do is we write a script for our synthetics product. The script includes information about what request our mobile app wants to send and what response we want to get back. And then we just test that and make sure that's true. And we don't just test it on our production backend APIs, but we actually also test it on staging so that if there's something that might accidentally get pushed to production that's going to break our mobile apps, we know about it ahead of time and we can react. I've told this to so many people where they're just like, wow, the lights just lit up in their head. They're like, I didn't know how to solve this problem because it's across teams, and that makes it complicated. The cool thing about this alert is you can have it go to the mobile app team so they can get ready and say, all right, we have to figure out how to deal with this. But you can also have the same exact alert go to whoever owns that API endpoint, right? Because they're responsible for that, and they are the ones who just made a change that's going to break the mobile app. So it brings them into the game, and it lets them see like how they are directly impacting end users. The other thing that we do with our own mobile apps is we actually have alerts that we set up based on our mobile product that are around specific error codes and per host. And so one of the ones that we check is our login service. If we get a 500 error back from our login service, that's bad. And so we want to know if we get any of those, we want to be alerted. We want to be alerted, and we want our login service guys to be alerted as well, because we want them to know that we're having some issues. So again, it's a way to connect these teams, and it's very simple, but it's really, really valuable to get ahead of this. So I have a little image of a canary up there to remind me to tell you about another story that I heard recently from a customer. So they had an error on the mobile app that they saw in our UI, so that our product helped them find it. And they traced it through, and they actually figured out that, all the way through APM, they figured out that there was a problem with one of their servers. And they were able to fix it, but they were also able to figure out that that problem with that server had actually also affected a bunch of their other products. So in this case, they said, having this mobile performance monitoring product was their canary. Like, their mobile app, I guess I should say, was their canary. Not always the best situation, but they actually were able to get ahead of this problem before it really blew up. And so they actually said this saved them multiple days in the war room and millions of dollars because our mobile app found a problem that was about to get rolled out to a bunch of other places. All right, so that's for alerts. Those are a few examples. There are other things that you can design, but if you think about the two-way communications that need to happen across teams, and make sure that the two teams who are responsible both get the same alert so they can talk about the problem and figure it out together, really, really helpful. Once you get an alert, it's really nice to have something to look at. It's nice to know, all right, if you don't already have a dashboard, to start putting one together to work together and solve the problem. So for dashboards, I actually put one together for our own mobile apps. So I happen to notice, and this is true, still true, one of our Android apps has a really, really high error rate right now. So I want to just start diving in and figuring that out, and I want to use that opportunity to put together a dashboard to share with everyone else. So I'm I'm going to step through this a little bit. One of the things I want to make sure is clear is the New Relic mobile product is it's completely necessary to monitor mobile apps. But if you use other products along with it, other tools, it's very powerful. All right, so you can get really good, helpful information on its own. But for my example, we're also going to use APM data, and we're going to use the APM UI, and we're going to use Insights dashboards to solve a problem. So I'm going to start here, and how many of you guys are familiar with Insights? All right, pretty good number. So with Insights, you're able to design some queries to figure out information. Like in this case, I have some errors. Let me start over. This is the APM team. Like anybody using our APM product, anybody doing back-end services and wanting to monitor those, it has a really, really long list of transactions that they're monitoring and errors that they're monitoring. And they don't necessarily know which of those errors are affecting mobile. So one of the cool things that we can do with New Relic is identify the user agent associated with those errors. So from the APM side, you can actually see which of the errors are coming from mobile. So that's what I did here. I filtered to only those coming from our Android app. Already, we've actually completely scoped down what a back-end person is looking at and understanding, like, okay, which ones actually apply to the mobile app. So I see here, we actually have 1,400, which is a really large number for us, errors on the back-end that impact our Android app. And most of them are coming from RPM, which is one of our back-end applications. The next thing I did was I created a few more widgets for the dashboard. And I wanted to know what was the primary error that we were seeing. And the primary error has to do with UTF-8 bad character string. So that's interesting. That's almost all of our errors. So this seems like one fix is going to fix most of our errors. That's kind of exciting. For me as a product manager anyway, I'm like, okay, so if we can get to the bottom of this problem, the performance of our app is going to be much, much better. So I worked with our mobile app team on this, and we sat down and we're like, all right, well, let's figure out how we can test this. And using Insights, we're actually able to pull the different parameters of the request so that we can actually do a manual try of that request and see what happens. So we did, and we ran through a couple of them, and they worked fine. All right, so this was a transient issue, which is trickier, but it's good to have other teams involved. Then I went over to the New Relic APM product and looked at error analytics, which is a slice and dice UI. It's really, really, really helpful in this case. So I was able to group by or facet by the specific user agent, again, that's related to the mobile app. And so here, right away, I'm able to say, these are all the errors on the back end that are impacting our mobile app. I could pull up the same exact error I looked at in Insights already, but I also was able to look at the specific error trace. So with the error trace, we know which file, we know which method, and we know how to have a conversation with our team. So this is how to start to piece things together. I find that I talk to customers and they feel like there's no solution for this. There's no solution for, mobile's like, well, all we really care about is crashes because crashes are all we know how to fix because that's on the app code side. And anything beyond crashes is more complex. It's a bigger system and there are more teams involved. So this is a way to bring everybody together. One of the cool things I'll point out here is, at the bottom right, for example, you can do a comparison. Great thing with mobile is you're always going to have iOS and you're always going to have Android. And so you can always see if they're the same or different and understand how they're interacting with the back end. And that'll really help debug problems. So you can start to triage that way. You can do more with that if you add you have your API endpoints and you have infrastructure. And you can see what else is using that same server, those same hosts, and start to triage that way. I don't have that up here, but that's like the next level. So you're pulling this information together. So performance is a feature. Parts of the mobile stack get forgotten sometimes or lost because the same backend services is supporting lots of different things. And it's good to highlight which ones are having a real impact on the mobile app and therefore the business. And the team, who owns it? Well, everybody does. But it's really hard to share. It's really hard to communicate. It's hard to debug together. So we need ways, we need tools to do that. So one last little anecdote. So I have my phone, and I have one of my apps open. And I'm going to actually, all right, so I'll open my email app, and I'll grab my latest email, and I'm pulling it down to do an update. What happens when I do that? Right? A lot of things. Like me doing that one motion, like imagine everything that just happened, all the way through to the infrastructure, right? It's making a request. It's using API endpoint, which is then calling backend services, which might call other backend services, and those are all hosted on a server or a container. And all of that impacts that one action that I just did. It's all part of the same system. So my call to action for you guys is, if your company has a mobile app, go help them make better reviews, better ratings, and better business, because you're going to be part of that stack somehow, and we have to all work on it together. That's it. Thank you.